You know, last week was a little bit crazy, and within that week, I've seen a lot of comments that have popped up that generally have the same kind of theme, and I've done what I can do to reply to those comments to provide some more insight into my own issues with anger, into the Pyromancer situation itself, and overall, I've been also getting a lot of congratulations on Asmongold's reaction, and so I thought I'd make today's video to kind of address all three key points that I've made in the comments, as well as to give you guys kind of more perspective on the impact that Asmongold has overall on a reaction. Now, again, I sat down with Pyro. We had a really great conversation. I'm going to talk a little bit about that here for you in this video, but we're going to start with my issues with anger on a personal level, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Pyromancer, and then we'll also talk about the Asmongold reaction. I'll show you guys all the stats. I'll show you guys how much money I made. I like to kind of really try to be as transparent as possible, namely because I view myself kind of as a data analysis, especially on YouTube, and being that we did my first video talking about Asmongold's impact on one reaction, the numbers here in and of itself continue to, I guess, support my hypothesis as it relates to reaction style content, especially from somebody with such a large reach and a wide audience. Now, let's talk about my issues with anger. If you guys are not interested in any or only one of the three kind of topics this video is going to kind of cover, feel free to jump to the chapter markers below. Thanks so much for being here, and hello everyone, my name's Brian. If for some reason this is a YouTube video that's recommended to you, I like to talk about video games, specifically MMORPGs, but also I kind of dabble into Halo and Destiny, meaning that I just kind of love a lot and a wide range of video games. And I have multiple channels that I cover those here on YouTube, and that's actually going to be something we talk about here in the future as to why, as that is also part of kind of what I'm doing as I'm kind of breaking down the YouTube algorithm for you guys as well. So hopefully you guys look forward to those videos in themselves. But last week was obviously an outlier. We had a big dramatic issue, and with add-ons kind of were conflicting. You have two different hard viewpoints that were really coming together, and in my personal opinion, this has been a long time coming. This has been years and years in the making. So while not personally surprising, overall it was just a very hard week within the Final Fantasy XIV community, and we saw a lot of things play out like that. And that's kind of generally the summary. You can go check out the videos if you guys are generally curious as to kind of, you know, the whole history and the full context, but that's not what this is about. You probably, and if you've ever followed my content, I'm generally a really happy person. Like, that's not an act. This isn't, you know, I'm not putting myself, you know, into some kind of character for the camera in this regards. And I think what essentially proves that point is that I've been doing YouTube with Work to Game for over 5 years, this channel specifically for 2 years. And if this was an act, clearly you would see through that. Like, there's no way that I think anybody can put up, you know, kind of a front for a long period of time, a lot of footage, a lot of videos, and essentially then kind of be like, oh, it turns out I wasn't who I said I was. But I've also said over the course of those years that I also struggle with anger, and usually people will reply like, oh, that doesn't seem like it's a part of your character. And that's just because, like, obviously a YouTube video is a limited window into somebody. A live stream ends up being a bigger window into that person because they're live over a longer period of time, and video can be edited. Case in point, my son just came up when we talked about replacing batteries in one of his favorite toys. So yes, you get a limited window into that. Now, I haven't really had any issues or haven't had any outbursts with my anger in a long time. I've gone to therapy for that. Obviously, one of the things that I do have on Pyro is age. I've been around and on this planet a little bit longer, so over the course, especially the last several years, I've been able to grow and kind of have you know, have my temper tempered, maybe just by the fact of aging alone. But anger has been something that I have struggled with a long time, with pretty much, like, I think I was even put into, you know, therapy as a kid, just because I would just have this anger that would just kind of boil up. And what anger management is it isn't a cure, but it's the giving yourselves the ability to be, you know, or to step out of the situation, or to find where, for me, when I'm angry, I'm not rational. I don't have the ability to think. It just becomes this kind of like very narrow-minded focus. And so whenever I would have like bouts of anger, or when I would start to feel myself get heated, thankfully I've been able to have the tools at hand to step out of those situations, to get away from the situations, to calm down, to let my rational brain take back control, and then kind of look at the situation at hand. Like, I would argue that not all anger is bad anger. Sometimes there's plenty of things to be angered at, and derive that focus. That actually can be a big motivating factor, but you can't maintain anger. Anger can't be your driving force to get things done all the time. And so for me, it's something that like I have to be keenly, very well aware of it. And, I have to be very well aware. And one of the things that humbled me is I know a couple of years ago, I ended up just having a moment that just kind of spurted up and I found myself angry. And it surprised me because for the longest time, I felt like I had it under control. And so that kind of humbled me in a way that reminded me that, like, yes, there isn't really kind of a cure, that even though that I've gotten older, that even though that like prior to like just getting really angry and upset several years ago, it was like a decade or more since I was like, I had like just this like anger that kind of, was trying to take over. And no one's ever, like, I've never hit anybody. I've never hurt anybody in that regard. So it's just like this, just, I don't know, like it's hard to explain. But I don't like it. It's not something that I'm like, that's who I am. It's just something that I have and that I work on. And so the last time that I had that was years ago. And I thought like at that point, like what surprised me about that was that like, I thought I was like, oh yeah, I've got the tools. I know how to kind of manage it. And, I was able to go sit down with my therapist and talk about that. And ultimately I was able to kind of, look at what were the stressors on that situation and kind of really look at, things that I wasn't really kind of, on guard for. I was like, oh, I didn't think that was something that bothered me, but it did. And it was just subtle. It was kind of like, you just kind of have this little chipping away at the veneer. And then eventually you're like, oh, like that actually did bother me. I just wasn't either being honest with myself or what have you. Now, all that's to be said is that what I've developed in my personal life, and this is what I talked to Pyro about this and kind of I gave him, like, this is what I've developed, is that I develop an action plan so that I don't have to make a choice in the moment. Because in the moment, I'm not rational. I'm not thinking. And generally, like, like what we saw, and, this is what him and I talked about, is that, like, you're not your best self. You're not a logical version of yourself. And to make a decision in that moment probably is going to be the wrong decision that you're going to end up making. And so what it is that, you create a plan and then you execute the plan. So you're like, oh my gosh, like I feel like I'm just getting so angry at this situation. Rather than think about what's happening, you just, oh, okay, I know that if this is where I just need to either immediately exit, immediately hit end stream, immediately, like leave the room, etc. And that is something that, for me personally, is how I kind of cope, how I manage my anger. And anger isn't a cure. And that's one of the things that, like, talking into the comments, is that when it comes to Pyromancer, him and I, like I said, we sat down, had a really good conversation. And at the end of the day, like, I think essentially overall, there's like one thing that we just said to say, we just agree to disagree on the whole subject is, with what happened last week. And that's more than fine. And I was like, honestly, like I said to him, dude, I'm rooting for you. I want you to make the best content. I think that's something that's good with the Final Fantasy XIV community. Everybody's, of course, welcome to disagree with me, but I'm very pro content creation. I'm very pro content creators putting themselves out there, making things happen, because that's a great way that promotes these games that I love. So when it comes to Final Fantasy XIV, more people talking about Final Fantasy XIV is good for the game. And that's going to mean that there's going to be a wide range of opinions and styles and things like that. And I might like some over others, but just because I don't like somebody's content or how they kind of approach it, like I'm not rooting against them, because I think there's a community, an audience, a message out there for everybody, because that's one of the things about multiplayer games is when in a multiplayer, like, this is going to bring in all kinds of opinion and worldview. And that's something that, like, I like about a multiplayer game, is that it gets me out of my own head, that I can sit down and talk to people of all walks of life and get all kinds of interesting perspectives. And that's just something that I like personally, because, like, I always try to seek understanding. I always want to understand why somebody thinks the way they think. And that's usually just kind of me, obviously, asking questions and kind of doing a deep dive into that. Now, that being said, is that I kind of see a lot of people who are like, oh, Pyro's going to do this again, and he's always got anger. And I've even seen people kind of relate Pyro to maybe like a past relationship that they've had. And, like, in my worldview, and then you don't have to adopt this, but just kind of explain it. Pyro said, and he apologized. Whether you think he needed to or didn't need to, like, is personally irrelevant. But the best thing that we can do in that moment as human beings is to say thank you and kind of move on with our lives. And essentially, like, that doesn't mean you have to go and support him and sub to him and support him in that, like, financially or even in his content. But it does mean that it is a moment that can be moved on from. And I've seen people in some of the comments that kind of feel stuck in either their frustration or their anger at the whole situation. And this could come into a variety of different things. Like, I'm not going to sit here and try to analyze everybody, and nor am I analyzing anybody actually in this regards, but just how I approach this situation is that it's just better for like me to sit here and say thank you and then move on. It's better for us in terms of like whether you feel like forgiveness is needed or not, to forgive and move on, even if that you feel like he's going to be a repeat person and, you know, a repeat offender. Like, at the end of the day, like, I think it's better for us as both a community but individuals to forgive and to move on. That doesn't mean you have to forget. That doesn't mean like when somebody does something again. But again, we're talking about anger in this regard. So we're not talking about, there's no cure, there's no pill, there's nothing that's going to sit here and all of a sudden say, hey. And so the challenge that I kind of try to, I guess, equate to all of this, to kind of put this into an actionable focus, whether you were there or not, in terms of like being able to say thank you and just kind of move on with your life, in terms of the situation, is literally like practice empathy. Now, I say practice empathy because I've seen people say that they're naturally empathetic. I don't know if there's such a thing as really naturally empathetic. I think that empathy is a muscle that you actually have to work on. It's that kind of putting yourself in their position, or trying to understand the full context, etc. And maybe, if nothing else, just having that knowledge, that understanding. Not that you have to agree with it, but it's essentially just kind of saying, okay, I'm going to try to use this as an opportunity to practice that empathy when it comes down to it. And yeah, I think that's what I wanted to say on those kind of two things. It's like, this is a good opportunity for us to kind of hopefully grow as a community and hopefully continue to get better. But now I want to pivot, you know, in this regards, because I said I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about Asmongold's reaction to the situation. What does that ultimately look in terms of numbers, and why I don't think drama content is like really good content. Like, why I don't think it's not financially viable. It's not, you know, it's not anything that you build a career off of. And not that I'm trying to actually build a YouTube career. This is just a passion project for me. So let's go ahead and dive into that right now, and let's talk about the numbers and the impact, and hopefully you guys also get something to get out of that. Cool. All right, so here we are, and this is the Epic Gamer Moment number 2 video. Now, if we jump in here and just kind of our overview, you'll see that in this case, at this current time, I actually anticipated that this video might at least make $100 or more. It does not appear that that's going to be the case of it. We'll review why here in a little bit, but picked up 105 subscribers. Those are actually something in my mind concerning subscribers, because if they're just kind of following for drama content, that's not what they're going to end up getting on that. So those could be subscribers that we end up seeing dipping out later. In the course of it, 37.1k views, which in this case it's more 34,000 more than normal. And overall, by the time that Asmongold reacted, we were just right around 18k views for this. Now, one of the things to kind of highlight a few things, search ended up being high. This is obviously a hot topic that happened last week, so it was catching a lot of people's interest, as opposed to like just general news and guides that I do. YouTube recommendation in this case was 30% up next in YouTube home. So lots of things that were happening in this regards, but we can actually show you guys purely what ended up happening in this in it. Now, impression click-through rate on this was 12.3%. Like I said, 110,000 impressions on this thumbnail alone. And breaking down base off traffic search as kind of an extension of what we just covered, YouTube search, browse features, and external. Now, if we go look at the external sources, Reddit ended up, I guess, linking this video. So half of the traffic actually came from Reddit. So not 100% from like, Asmon, but that doesn't actually mean that it didn't have an impact, because from Asmon's reaction here, we can see at 67.2% of the recommended follow through from his video. Now, to go look at a pure number on what he ended up pulling in for the video itself, 427,000 views to the reaction itself, which is amazing. And then again, we look at we look at our overall views at 37.1k. Generally speaking, if we knock off 18,000, if we just kind of account for a half, what we end up looking at is a click-through rate from Asmon's videos. Like, if we're going to relate all of the rest of the views from this point forward, generally speaking, you're looking at a 4 to 5%. And then if we take all the views, all 37.1, an 8% click-through rate, which is substantial, because if we actually jump back into the original video, the first video that Asmon reacted to, in this case, less impressions, overall 6.4k views on the original video to 144, but essentially this actually video was up for a day, so he ended up getting about 3,000, generally speaking, anywhere from a 1 to 2% click-through rate on the original videos, what we calculated. But you can see here a lot of recommendation from suggested videos based off of his, and more in this case at 74%. So it's really quite substantially interesting in my opinion, and you'll ultimately kind of see various different trends in when people kind of come in versus the typical retention of my videos. Now on the revenue side, click-back paste CPM, that's essentially at 6.29, which is a little bit lower from my overall channel averages here on Ginger JRPG. And so you'll end up seeing that, generally speaking, it's got my RPM at $1.67. And right now you can see lifetime at $61.20. Now you might be asking yourself, why is that the case? And this is essentially kind of where things come into play. Overall, you can see here by the time we're looking at, with less than about 30 seconds into it, only 35% of people are actually watching the video. They've either seen it from Asmongold's video, or they've also they're just coming in to vent their frustration. There's a general theory online, and maybe there is a truth to it, like I'm not sure, but overall, I always view my coverage of like what's going on within the community, which would essentially be kind of equated to a drama video, as a public service to offer context and compassion to the subject at hand. That is essentially why I choose to cover it, because ultimately it isn't necessarily like good for the channel and what I try to build with in terms of like evergreen content and guides, and also kind of just more information based style videos. And the reason is because your retention rate is, if someone does subscribe from that, they're subscribing to something that isn't generally happening. Like you have to, if you're going to be a drama channel, I think you have to either go make drama happen, and that's what a lot of people do. And there's a big, Twitch community and, like YouTube kind of thing that kind of lives and breathes off that High School Musical style stuff. But that is manufactured. That is manufactured. And I don't think it's essentially sustainable from the enjoyment that you make videos. And so this is essentially, hopefully, really interesting information from you. If the majority of people are not watching your video like right after the start, but they're commenting, because we had a ton of comments, like we just jump in here, like scrolling for days as it loads in, like we have so many comments. A lot of people want to weigh in on the subject at hand. Nothing wrong with that. But you can see here over the last 48 hours and even the last hour itself, just 7 views, as people kind of get the information, or YouTube still feels like it needs to be recommended now. But overall, this is going to cap out less than $100 in revenue. And that's honestly, that's why it's not sustainable, because ultimately you have to start going chasing. You got to make everything sensationalized. And I think that would easily burn me out in terms of making, quality content for people. And so that's kind of what I want to kind of break down. Asmon's reaction as the second reaction in this case, obviously higher. This was also a very sensational, this was a big story. A lot of people interested in it. And so that could have affected the fact that it went from 2% to 8% click-through rate. If we again count we're just taking the whole totals of the videos themselves. And that's great. That's very interesting. But the general, theory still stands to be true, that ultimately for people who really blow up onto the scene due to his reactions, it's multiple reactions over the course of time, where whatever the person is stating is generally received very well. And so it continues to reintroduce that person to his whole community, and eventually the community is like, okay, I'll go give this guy a chance. And some people do that right away, but ultimately when you're talking about as large an audience that he has, then that's something that essentially just kind of proves true. So there's for people, and the reason I shared this, because as somebody who kind of tries to help people get started in YouTube, the reason I share this is that you're not one reaction away from greatness. You're not one, if only somebody would see my one video that I made. You just got to keep making the stuff that you want to make. Say something, that's something I always tell people. Say something, whether you feel confident in it, continue to work and hustle. And essentially then maybe you are just a handful of reactions away from really blowing up on the scene and getting your name out there. But it's not one video that's ever going to kind of do it for you. But anyway, I think this is all overall very fascinating stuff, like a really cool data and information that obviously YouTube provides. I think essentially retention is the key aspect, because again, people are like, you're farming for views and things like that. That's a very ignorant viewpoint, and I'm going to state that in very strong language. Like, when people say that, it's like they either just don't know what they're talking about, or they believe something that just generally isn't true. And there's nothing you can really do that, except for the fact that, like, I did send out this information to people, because I just want to be as transparent as possible. And when it comes down to it, it's like, here's the information, like, here's what's been stated, here's what I have publicly for you, and hopefully that ends up being something unique. But yeah, I guess almost $10 of that actually came from premium viewers, so not a lot of huge ads in that regards. It's just, I think this is really cool data to have and to kind of understand. So that's the video that I wanted to make it today. I wanted to talk to you guys about those 3 subjects. Hopefully you got something good out of this video. Thank you guys so much for all the positive comments last week. The one thing I want to make sure that I always kind of focus in on is the positive comments, because no matter what, you're always going to get kind of that negative spin, that negative view comment, and it's easy for us as creators to focus in on it. And at the end of the day, the best thing that you can do for yourself, especially if you're a content creator, take your phone, delete all the stupid social media stuff off of it. That way you're not being inundated by just like negativity all day, every day, because your brain will automatically focus in on the negativity over the positivity. And that's just a natural fact of how we evolved and developed as human beings. Anyway, guys, I thank you for your time today. Hopefully you got something good out of this video. Hopefully I'll see you in my next one. But until then, take care.
Yeah. It's time to chill out on the couch and read some comments. That's right. You know me when it comes to destiny. I'm off with a clan, and I'm glad you're feeling better. Oh yeah.